Hey, what is up, you sexy beast? Sotomar Tristan here, and I'm bringing you scary stories. Now, the title of this one is very misleading. It's called Squidward Suicide, but it's an actually very scary story. It honestly scared me a little bit. I really hope you guys do enjoy the story. If you do, don't forget to leave it a like. I just want to start off by saying, if you want an answer at the end, prepare to be disappointed. There just isn't one. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course. Most internships aren't, but it did have some perks beyond education. To adults, it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would go crazy over it. Me and two other interns were in the editing room with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut. We received a copy that was supposed to be Fear of the Krabby Patty and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that this isn't the final animation, they often put up a mocking card title, sort of an inside joke for us, with phony, often sometimes lewd titles, such as How Does Sex Work instead of Rockabye Bivalve. When SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop, nothing particularly funny but work-related chuckles, so when we saw the title card Squidward Suicide, we didn't think it was more than a morbid joke. One of the interns did a small throat laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music plays as is normal. The story begun when Squidward, practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down. He has a concert that night that he needs to practice for. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy with Patrick. The bubble splash screen comes up and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. Then, this is when things begin to seem off. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound didn't. At this point, the sound is synced up with the animation, so yes, that's not common. When he stops playing, the sound finishes if his skip never happened. Then, if slight murmuring in the crowd began to boo him. Not normal cartoon booing that is common in the show, but you could barely hear malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes towards the crowd. With SpongeBob in center frame, he too is booing, very much unlike him. This isn't the oddest thing though. What is odd is with everyone had hyper-realistic eyes, very detailed, clearly not shots of real people's eyes, with something a bit more realistic than CGI. The pupils were red and some of us looked at each other, obviously confused. Since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children yet. The shot goes to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view out of his porthole window is of the night and it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part is the point at which there is no sound, literally no sound, not even the feedback from the speakers in the room, as if the speakers were turned off, though their status showed they were working perfectly. He sat there, blinking, in silence for about 30 seconds. Then he started to sob softly, putting his hands over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute more, all the while a sound in the background very slowly growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through a forest. The screen slowly begins to zoom in on his face. By slow, I mean only noticeable if you took shots at 10 seconds apart side by side. His sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen twitches a bit, as if it twists on itself for a split second, then back to normal. The wind through the trees sound gets slowly louder and more severe, as if the storm is brewing through somewhere. The eerie part is the sound, in Squidward sobbing. It sounded real, as if it wasn't coming from the speakers where holes were coming through from the other side. As good as sound as the studio likes to have, they don't purchase the equipment to be good. As good as sound as the studio likes to have, they don't purchase the equipment to be that good to produce that sound of quality. Below the sound of wind was sobbing, very faint, something that sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted for more than a second. You had a hard time pinning it. We watched the shot twice, so pardon me if I sound too specific with things. I had time to think about them. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed over the screen, as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animator paused and rewound frame by frame. What he saw was horrible. It was a photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. His face was mangled and bloodied, one eye dangling over his upturned face. Popped. He was naked down to his underwear, his stomach crudely cut open, his entrails laying beside him. He was laying on some pavement that was probably a road. The most upsetting part was that there was a shadow of the photographer. There was no crime tape, no evidence tags or markers, and the angle was completely off for the shot to be designed as evidence. It would seem that the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We, of course, were mortified, but pressed on, hoping it was just a sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward's, still sobbing, louder than before, and half-body in frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down the side of his face. The blood was also done in hyper-realistic style, looking as if you touched the blood, you'd get it on your fingers. The wind sounded now if it were a gale blowing through the forest, when now we were snapping sound of branches, the laughing, a deep baritone, lasting in longer intervals and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back. We all were. We knew we had to, though. This time the photo was that appeared of a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach with berets and a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was popped out too, naked except for underpants. Her entrails were piled on top of her, another crude cut along the back. Again, the body was on the street and the photographer's shadow was visible, very similar in size and shape to the first. I had to choke back vomit, and one in turn, the female in the room, ran out. The show resumed. About 5 seconds after the second photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all sound, like it did when the scene started. He put his tentacles down and his eyes were now done in hyper-realism, like the others in the beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen, as if he watched the viewer. After about 10 seconds, he started sobbing. This time, not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud. The most fear-inducing of all his sobbing was mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The sound of wind came back, and so did the deep voice laughing. This time, the photo lasted for a good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop it on the 4th, and backed up. This time the photo was of a boy, about the same age, but the scene was so different. The entrails were being pulled out from his stomach, wound by a large hand. The right eye popped and dangling, blood dripping down it. The animator proceeded. It was hard to believe, but the next one was so different we couldn't tell what. He went on to what was next, the same thing. He went back to the first and played them quicker, and I lost it. I vomited on the floor. The animating guys and sound editors gasping at the screen. The 5 frames were not as if they were 5 different photos, as they played out to be frames from a video. We saw the hands slowly lifting out the guts, when they focused on the kid's eyes. We saw 2 frames of the kid beginning to blink. The lead sound editor told us to stop. He had to call on the creator to see Mr. Hillenberg within about 15 minutes. He was confused as to why we called him down here, so the editor just continued the episode. Once a few frames were shown, all screaming, all sound again stopped. Squidward just stared at the viewer, full frame of face, for about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned out to that deep voice and it said, "Don't do it." And we see Squidward's hand holding a shotgun. He immediately pulls out the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splatter all over the wall behind him and his bed, and he flies back with force. The last 5 seconds of the episode show his body in bed on the side, one eye dangling to his left side of the head above the floor, staring blankly at it. Then the episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg is obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the hell was going on. Most people left the room at this point, so it was just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served to imprint the entirety of it in my mind and caused me horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory I could think was the file was edited by someone in the chain from the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called to analyze when it happened. The analysis of the file did show it was edited over by new material. However, the timestamp of it was a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware as well as glitches, as if by the timestamp may have glitched and showed the wrong time, but everything checked out fine. We don't know what happened to this day, and nobody does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child was identified and no clues were gathered about the data, nor involved physical clues in the photos. I never believed in unexplainable phenomena before, but now that I have something happen and can't prove anything about it beyond anecdotal evidence, I think twice about things. I really hope you guys did enjoy that story. It honestly got super creepy in my opinion. It's a pretty long one, you guys. Pretty good. Definitely not related to the title at all. But it is something creepy to think about. Hope you guys enjoyed. Have a great day. And remember the fact that I love you.